Welcome to The Hidden Load for the educators and leaders in medicine who hold everyone up. We will tackle the hard topics and help you conquer your chaos and get to calm, all by starting to acknowledge and remove that hidden load. This podcast is a space for us to name the things that are common but not normal. Each week, we'll look at the invisible weight you're carrying and explore practical coaching-based tools to help you find more calm, better boundaries, and a sense of purpose that doesn't require you to run on empty. I'm so glad that you've carved time out for yourself today. Let's get into the episode. Welcome back to The Hidden Load. I am your host, Dr. Santina Wheat. And today, we are diving headfirst into an operational reality that is driving clinical attrition across every single tier of healthcare. Now, I want to start by asking you a question that cross-cuts every specialty. Whether you work in an ambulatory clinic, an inpatient floor, an ICU, or an operating room. How frequently are you managing administrative data loops, tracking missing system inputs, or completing documentation outside of your scheduled clinical hours? If you're like the average healthcare professional today, your answer is not occasionally, unfortunately. It is constantly. We operate under a massive structural illusion in modern medicine. The idea that our shift ends when our clinical coverage ends. Time motion analytics across various specialties show that the contemporary clinician is running two parallel timelines simultaneously: the visible timeline of direct patient care and an unmanaged secondary timeline of data navigation, compliance documentation, and system navigation. And so what's the result? That we're carrying an invisible load that doesn't live on our master schedule, but it follows us straight home. So today, we are moving past generic wellness advice. We aren't going to talk about breathing exercises or taking a vacation, even though I really do believe in those things. But today, we are going to conduct a cold clinical autopsy on the structural traps that keep us exhausted, specifically the biological reality of pajama time, the heavy cost of the context switching tax, and why breaking these patterns is a profound responsibility that we owe to the teams we lead and also the learners that we teach. Let's start by defining our metrics, because you cannot fix what you do not measure. In operational healthcare design, there is a specific metric known as pajama time. It was originally coined to track those after-hours electronic health record activities in ambulatory settings, and it has evolved into a universal concept. It represents any uncompensated cognitive labor that occurs outside of your designated shift or service hours, whether that is logging in from your couch to finish an operative note, reviewing inpatient telemetry trends from home, or catching up on institutional emails at midnight. The pajama time is not a sign of high productivity. Unfortunately, it's a sign of systemic failure. It's uncompensated cognitive labor that directly strips out the essential decompression windows that your brain requires for baseline neurologic recovery. And then there is the cognitive context switching tax. Data shows that the modern healthcare provider shifts their operational focus approximately every 2 minutes during an active clinical duty. Think about a typical day, regardless of your specialty. If you're an inpatient attending, you're trying to conduct a thoughtful multidisciplinary teaching round. You get interrupted by a page about a telemetry drop. You pivot to answer a phone call from radiology about a critical finding, and you are immediately flagged by a case manager about a discharge barrier. If you're a surgeon, you step out of the OR from a complex case and are immediately handed 3 prescription authorization forms to sign while trying to review that next patient's pre-op labs. This high-frequency shifting creates what psychologists call attention residue. When you jump from task to task every 120 seconds, a piece of your cognitive bandwidth stays stuck on the previous problem. And so your brain never fully arrives in the room with the next patient, the next student, or the next administrative challenge. By midday, you aren't physically broken, but your prefrontal cortex is completely bankrupt from the accumulated tax of 1,000 micro interruptions. I want you to let that sink in. You aren't exhausted because you lack stamina. You are exhausted because your brain is playing a context switching tax every 2 minutes of your working life. So, why do we let this happen? Why do we allow these boundaries to erode so predictably? It goes back to our conditioning and medical training. From day one of school and residency, medical culture institutionalizes behavioral patterns that set us up for long-term boundary failure. We are taught to conflate total personal self-sacrifice with clinical excellence. We are conditioned to believe that setting up a professional boundary is synonymous with a lack of dedication or a lack of care. This conditioning forces us straight into the overfunctioning trap. When healthcare systems break down, clinicians default to an automatic toxic response loop. The loop looks like this. Systemic operational failure occurs. The clinician absorbs the friction via personal time. The system appears functional to everyone evaluating it. But every time a floor is understaffed, or a supply chain delays a critical instrument, or a software update adds 3 steps to a simple order, you generally don't let the system fail. You stay late, you carry the extra pager, you run down the hall to find the equipment yourself. And that's not great because you are using your own personal baseline health as the padding to absorb the institutional impact. You here have become a system buffer. And because you absorb that friction, the data looks great on the leadership's dashboard. The metrics look stable, the patients get seen, the charts get closed, the RVUs are what they should be. But by stepping into every operational gap out of a misplaced sense of duty, we are actually hiding the structural flaws from the very people who have the authority to fix them. We're subsidizing a broken system with our own longevity. Now, if you aren't willing to stop overfunctioning for yourself, I want you to look at through. Now, if you aren't willing to stop overfunctioning for yourself, I want you to look at this through the lens of leadership and medical education. This is the part of the hidden load that we must name. Your inability to set boundaries is actively harming the people that you lead and the learners that you teach. Our trainees, the medical students, the residents, the fellows, even the junior faculty, they are hyper attuned to us. They do not just watch how we perform a physical exam or manage a code. They are watching how we exist in this profession. If you're a program director, a chief, a senior attending who is constantly a system buffer, someone who normalized working until midnight, who answers emails instantly at 2 a.m., and who is clearly white-knuckling their career, then you are setting the cultural ceiling for your department. Inadvertently, you are teaching your learners that to be successful and a competent physician, they must also sacrifice their humanity. When you refuse to set operational boundaries, you create an environment of fear-based perfectionism. Your residents will begin to hide their mistakes because they think they have to be flawless robots to survive your standard. Your junior faculty will look at your leadership role and say, "No, thank you. I don't want that life." And you are effectively killing the pipeline of future leaders. Setting boundaries isn't a selfish wellness act. And don't get me wrong, wellness acts aren't selfish. but it's a fundamental act of psychological safety for your entire team. If they don't see you say no to systemic overreach, then they will believe that they don't have the permission slip to say no either. So, how do we break that loop? How do we enforce boundaries in a way that's effective and doesn't label us as being the difficult physician? Well, we have to shift our communication stance from passive compliance to true operational assertiveness. And when I say assertiveness, I don't mean being confrontational and I don't mean being difficult. It's an operational competency based on transparency and safety. It is the direct, honest communication of your true resource boundaries without violating workplace relationships or clinical safety standards. To do this, I want you to start using an evidence-based communication algorithm designed specifically to protect operational parameters, the DESC framework. Let's map out a script for handling an unmanaged operational expansion request, such as being asked to add 3 additional complex patients to an already overextended inpatient service or afternoon clinic template. So remember, DESC. D is describe the facts. E is express the impact. S is specify the target route. And C is outline the positive consequences. So D, describe the facts. Strip out the personal emotional framing. State the unvarnished numbers. Our service is currently managing an acuity index that requires maximum nursing coverage, and we have reached our designated cap for safe team bonding. E, express the impact. Connect those numbers directly to safety, team burnout, and learner education. When we exceed these parameters, the context switching tax prevents us from conducting safe handoffs, increases documentation backlogs into the night, and completely eliminates our ability to provide required teaching for our residents. Now, I would say whatever the impact is, and it'll be multiple, it's important to remember who you are talking to when you decide which aspect of the impact you're going to share. Moving on to S, specify the target route. Propose an explicit, immediately actionable alternative or CAP. I need us to activate our secondary cross-coverage system, or I need us to hold further admissions until our morning discharges are completed. And then C, outline the positive consequences. State how this adjustment directly benefits the institution's safety metrics so that our team can preserve appropriate diagnostic safety thresholds and prevent charting errors that delay hospital discharge metrics. It's important to demonstrate that you're not only thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about the needs of the organization or institution as well. When you integrate this into a single statement, you shift the conversation from a personal complaint to an objective, safety-centered leadership directive. And when you can do that, you show your learners and those who you're leading that it's not just an individual perspective. It's a perspective for the team because we're all here working together. So to close out today's episode, I want to give you a concrete action step to launch within the next 24 hours, the 7-day boundary audit. I want you to target your single worst digital or operational leak window, whether that's your first hour at home after a shift, your weekend downtime, or your personal family cycles. I want you to establish a firm, non-negotiable tech lockout or off-duty policy for that specific time span this week. Look at your team and your learners in the eye and say, I'm logging off at this time, and I expect you to do the same. Treat that off-grid window as a required component of your clinical competence and your leadership modeling. A positive no to an unmanaged systemic expansion is fundamentally a yes to your existing core responsibilities, your team's psychological safety, and your long-term career sustainability. Once you've set that one boundary, I hope you'll share with me how it worked. Did it give you a little bit of space to think? Did it give you a little bit of space to find joy? Or even just a little bit of space to recuperate? Usually the answer is yes, and I hope that you find that for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of The Hidden Load. If this diagnostic breakdown resonated with you, I hope you'll share it with a colleague or a co-faculty member who is currently paying too much context switching tax to survive. Let's protect the person so that we can protect the mission. I'm Dr. Santina Wheat, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to The Hidden Load. If today's conversation spoke to you, I would love for you to share it with a colleague who might need to hear it too. It's one of the simplest ways we can start shifting the culture of medicine together. And remember, your time spent reflecting here matters. You can earn free CME or CE credits for listening to today's episode through the Pinnacle app. You'll find that link in the show notes. If you are looking for one-on-one coaching support or want to dive deeper into the resources we discussed today, let's connect. You can find information on how to reach me in the show notes. And don't forget to hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And leave me a rating so that others can find me too. And take care of yourself because you deserve to be held up too. And I'll see you next time.